He asked for her number, and she gave it without hesitation. Her heart fluttered with promise. In the days that followed, their conversations over cups of coffee stretched into hours. Christopher admired her ambition and sense of wonder. Melissa was captivated by his intelligence and the mysterious heir he married, like he knew secrets about how the world worked. With each passing day, her feelings grew deeper. Not just admiration, but a vulnerable trust she rarely offered so quickly. She would lie awake at night, clutching her phone, smiling at his last message, hoping the next would come before dawn. By the time Melissa graduated, they were officially a couple, in love and brimming with shared plans for the future. She imagined a life filled with big city dreams, love's warm glow, and the kind of success story that would make her parents proud. But no fairy tale is complete without shadows. Even in those early days, there were fleeting moments when Christopher would evade certain topics about his past or make cryptic remarks about trusting no one. Sometimes she'd catch a flicker in his eyes, like he was seeing something she couldn't. It unsettled her, but she told herself love meant accepting the whole person, even the mysterious parts. Melissa brushed it aside as mere eccentricity. After all, everyone has secrets, right? They were married the following autumn in a lavish ceremony under a canopy of golden leaves. Melissa wore a delicate white gown, her cheeks pink with joy, while Christopher looked every bit the dashing self-made millionaire. The world seemed open and wide, full of possibility. As she took his hand and whispered her vows, her voice trembled, not with doubt, but with the magnitude of her belief in them, in their future. Little did Melissa know her journey was only beginning. After the wedding, Melissa moved into Christopher's sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. The house, ensconced by high hedges and electric gates, was a fortress of solitude, reflecting Christopher's desire for privacy. Inside, marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and art pieces from across the globe adorned the walls. Each room was styled with an elegant blend of classic architecture and modern furnishings, and from the second-floor balcony, you could see the city skyline glimmering at night like a sea of stars. For Melissa, it felt like stepping into a dream someone else had written, beautiful, extravagant, and just out of touch with reality. It was surreal stepping into that world. She had grown up in a simple household where leftover casserole was considered the height of luxury. Here, the staff insisted on preparing elaborate meals served on porcelain plates with gold trim. There was a live-in housekeeper, a gardener who doubled as a handyman, and even a chauffeur for special occasions. At first, Melissa felt guilty about the indulgence. She missed the clatter of her mother's pots and pans, the squeaky laundry room door, things that once annoyed her but now felt like anchors to her old, honest life. She would often sneak to the kitchen to help clean her own dishes or do laundry just to feel grounded. He asked for her number, and she gave it without a second thought, her heart fluttering with anticipation. In the days that followed, their conversations over lattes and quiet corners of downtown cafes stretched on for hours. Jonathan admired Rachel's drive and her wide-eyed view of the world. Rachel, in turn, was drawn to his sharp intellect and the enigmatic way he spoke, as if he carried hidden knowledge of how the world truly worked. Each word between them felt electric, filled with possibility. Rachel found herself replaying their talks at night, clinging to his every phrase, as if trying to memorize the language of a new, thrilling future. By the time Rachel graduated, they were a couple. Deeply in love, and full of dreams they wove together like a shared blueprint for the future. She envisioned a life painted in the hues of the city's skyline, warmed by love, and lit with the kind of success story her parents would boast about with pride. But even the most perfect stories come with shadows. From the beginning, there were occasional moments when Jonathan would dodge questions about his history or drop cryptic lines about never placing too much trust in anyone. Sometimes she caught a flicker of darkness behind his easy charm, a hesitation when she asked about his childhood or past relationships. But she told herself love required faith, faith that the pieces would make sense in time. Rachel dismissed these as quirks, eccentricities that came with brilliance. After all, who didn't have secrets? They married that fall in a lavish ceremony beneath a canopy of golden maple leaves. Rachel wore a delicate ivory gown, her cheeks flushed with happiness, while Jonathan embodied the image of the handsome self-made millionaire. The world lay before them, ripe with opportunity and promise. She remembered gripping his hand tightly as they exchanged vows, a silent plea echoing in her mind. Please let this be forever. What Rachel didn't realize was that her real journey was just beginning. After the wedding, Rachel moved into Jonathan's expansive estate tucked along the cliffs just beyond the city's limits. Shielded by towering hedges and an electronic gate, the property was a sanctuary of privacy, reflecting Jonathan's quiet nature. Inside, the floors shimmered with polished stone beneath glittering chandeliers, and artwork collected from around the world lined the pristine walls. Each space was styled with a seamless blend of timeless elegance and sleek modern touches. From the balcony on the second floor, the distant city lights twinkled at night, a reflection of the stars above. For Rachel, it felt unreal to step into that kind of life. She had grown up in a home where dinner leftovers were a luxury. Here, staff served multi-course meals on dishes rimmed with gold. There was a live-in housekeeper, a gardener who handled everything from rose bushes to roof leaks, and even a driver who stood ready for every formal occasion. At first, Rachel felt an ache of guilt over the indulgence. Sometimes, she would sit alone in the massive kitchen late at night, cradling a cup of tea and trying to remember the creak of the floorboards in her childhood home, the sound that once grounded her. More than once, she'd sneak into the kitchen to wash her own coffee mug or toss a load of laundry into the machine. Small acts that helped her stay grounded in a world that seemed too polished to be real. Yet beneath all the luxury, she found flashes of true joy. She and Jonathan would spend long evenings discussing advances in digital tech, dreams of charitable initiatives, and the possibility of one day launching a foundation to support underprivileged youth. Those conversations stirred something deep in Rachel, a sense of purpose, a belief that love could be more than romance. It could be a partnership aimed at creating something good in the world. Jonathan seemed to have a boundless well of passion, always building, always envisioning. Whenever he vanished into a late-night business call, he'd return with a gentle kiss on her forehead and assure her that every sacrifice he made was for their shared future. Each kiss, though brief, carried the unspoken promise of better days. She clung to them, even as the hours alone grew longer, and Rachel believed him. In her eyes, he was unstoppable. Still, little red flags flickered here and there. Jonathan had a tendency for abrupt mood swings, especially when specific calls came through. He'd excuse himself mid-conversation, disappearing to another room to answer in hushed, clipped tones. Once, Rachel overheard a muffled dispute in his study, something about a failing deal and tense negotiations. When she timidly asked if everything was okay, Jonathan chalked it up to business pressure. Nothing she needed to worry about. His tone was dismissive, but she chose to believe his words, pushing down the unease gnawing at her. They rarely entertained guests at the estate. For someone as influential and affluent as Jonathan, he seemed almost reclusive. He remained friendly enough at professional events, but rarely invited friends or business associates to their home. He said he cherished his privacy, and Rachel accepted that at first. After all, she had grown up in a close-knit community. Still, over time, the isolation of their social life began to weigh on her. The silence in the vast house sometimes echoed louder than any argument. Whenever doubt crept in, Rachel would recall the man who once captivated her. The man who talked about the future like it was something they were building together. She convinced herself that Jonathan's evasiveness was just part of surviving the high-stakes world he lived in. She chose patience, determined to be the steady partner he could rely on. She whispered to herself in the dark, "This is just a phase. He loves me. He'll come back to me fully, soon." But what she didn't know was that these early uncertainties would evolve into much deeper mysteries. A year into their marriage, Rachel discovered she was pregnant. The revelation brought a whirlwind of excitement and nervousness. How would Jonathan react? Would fatherhood bring them closer? When she shared the news, his face lit up. He scooped her into his arms, beaming, genuinely moved. In the weeks that followed, he made a visible effort to be present, postponing business trips, attending doctor's appointments, and even picking out baby names with childlike enthusiasm. Rachel dared to believe they had turned a corner, that the dream she held on to was finally becoming real. For a while it felt like they were entering a golden chapter, but that feeling didn't last. Soon, Jonathan's phone became an almost constant companion, buzzing at all hours with urgent messages. Calls pulled him away mid-conversation. He began traveling more frequently, murmuring about company expansions and complex deals in barely audible tones. When he returned home, his shoulders carried the weight of tension, and the easy smiles he once wore became rare. Rachel, now managing the emotional tides of pregnancy, found herself torn. Should she press for the truth and risk conflict, or keep faith in her husband and remain quietly supportive? Each night, as she placed her hands on her growing belly, she whispered promises to her unborn child, trying to silence the doubts screaming in her mind. One night, early into her second trimester, she experienced a sharp wave of abdominal pain that sent her into a panic. At the emergency room, doctors confirmed it was stress-induced cramping. She was advised to rest, and above all, to worry less. When she tried to explain to Jonathan how terrified she'd been, he merely said, "Everything's going to be fine," kissed her forehead, and walked out the door to another hastily arranged meeting. Rachel felt the loneliness settle in, heavy, consuming. She longed for his presence, his support. Occasionally, Jonathan would try to show he cared, bringing her herbal tea or rubbing her back when the aches flared up. But these gestures were brief, quickly overshadowed by his frequent absences. Rachel convinced herself not to complain. She reminded herself that Jonathan was making sacrifices for their child, for a future that would be filled with ease and opportunity. She found solace in the little one growing inside her, whispering quiet words of love to her unborn baby whenever Jonathan was away. But the more distant he became, the more doubt crept into her heart. Old rumors about shady business dealings started to resurface in her mind. She thought back to that tense phone call she'd overheard, the veiled threats, the quiet fury. Something about Jonathan's empire felt off. Still, every time she thought about confronting him, something stopped her. He was her husband, the father of her child. Didn't loyalty mean trusting him, even when the details didn't add up? But as her due date drew nearer, so did her anxiety. Rachel had pictured Jonathan at her side in the delivery room, holding her hand, telling her everything would be okay. Now, she wasn't even sure he would answer her calls. Even her parents, still living back in Willow Ridge, began to worry. Her mother gently offered to come stay with her in the city, but Rachel declined. She didn't want to intrude on Jonathan's need for privacy. She clung to a fragile belief that, in the end, Jonathan would put family first. It wasn't just wishful thinking, it was the prayer she repeated every night. Then, one quiet evening about a month before her due date, Rachel was looking for a pen in Jonathan's study when she stumbled upon a sealed envelope. It bore the name Ariel Sutton, a name she didn't recognize, and inside was a hotel receipt for a luxury suite. The dates matched a time when Jonathan had said he was out of town for work. The bill was extravagant: room service for two, couples spa treatments, late-night wine orders. Her stomach twisted. The dates lined up with the months she'd spent navigating pregnancy mostly alone. She remembered the late-night texts, the secretive phone calls, the way he seemed colder every time he returned. Something deep inside her sank. That night, when Jonathan walked through the door, Rachel was waiting. His face drained of color for a brief second before he forced a casual laugh. "It's just business," he said, plucking the receipt from her fingers. "Ariel is a prospective investor. We had to entertain her. That's all, Rachel. Relax." But Rachel caught the tremor in his hand, the way his breath shortened. Doubt began to seep into her chest like cold air through a crack in the window. The man she had once trusted without hesitation, the man she had given everything to, might be lying. Worse, he might be betraying her in the cruelest way. A cold weight settled in her stomach, the kind of dread that doesn't shout but whispers, persistent and quiet, eroding certainty little by little. The thought that Jonathan could be carrying on an affair while she endured morning sickness and prepared to bring their child into the world made her stomach churn with something far more bitter than nausea. How could he smile at her, touch her belly, and speak of baby names while possibly sharing nights in hotel rooms with someone else? In the days that followed, he tried to smooth things over, leaving extravagant flower arrangements in the living room, draping shimmering jewelry on her vanity like offerings for peace. But the gestures felt empty. Rachel's instincts screamed that something vital between them had shifted. Trust, the very foundation of their marriage, was starting to crack right in front of her. As much as she wanted to believe his words, a quiet, relentless voice echoed in her mind. He's hiding something. Each night, she stared at the ceiling, replaying his words, looking for sincerity, for any hint that her fears were misplaced. But there was none. Needing perspective, Rachel turned to her lifelong friend, Marissa, the same friend who had given her that extra ticket to the gala all those years ago. When Rachel told her about the hotel receipt and Jonathan's brush-off, Marissa's reaction was swift and sharp. "You're carrying his baby," she snapped. "And he's out whining and dining some other woman? That's not business, Rach." Rachel crumpled into tears, overwhelmed by confusion and guilt. Was she overreacting or finally seeing the truth? Which hurt more, the sting of betrayal or the fear that she might be misjudging the man she once loved so deeply? She sobbed into Marissa's arms, whispering, "What if I'm wrong? What if I'm right?" The uncertainty was worse than either answer. At night, she lay awake, hand resting on her belly, trying to untangle the mess in her head. The jewelry, the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the hotel receipt, it all hinted at something larger. But what was it? An affair? Or something else entirely? A financial scandal? Maybe he was hiding trouble in his business. Somehow, Rachel almost hoped it was just a money problem. The idea that Jonathan was cheating on her felt like an insult to everything they had built. Her mind spun with scenarios, wrapping her in a fog of anxiety that left her breathless. She tried journaling, tried prayer, tried silence, but nothing eased the constant thrum of worry that kept her awake until dawn. With her due date fast approaching, Rachel knew she needed answers. Real ones. She could no longer live in the shadows of half-truths. Her child deserved honesty, and a father who didn't live behind locked doors and whispered excuses. But Rachel couldn't have known that the truth she was so desperate to uncover would pale in comparison to what was still to come. One late evening, just days before her due date, a sharp, wrenching pain surged through her abdomen. She had been in the kitchen, sipping ginger tea to settle her nerves, when the pain struck so hard she dropped the cup. It shattered on the tile floor as her body doubled over. Fear crashed through her in an instant. She was completely alone. Jonathan had left that morning for another critical meeting across the state. The housekeeper had taken the weekend off to visit family. Rachel gasped through the contractions, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her phone. Her first instinct was to call Jonathan, but every attempt went straight to voicemail. Each contraction hit harder than the last, and Rachel knew she couldn't afford to wait. With trembling hands and a shaky voice, she dialed emergency services, explaining that she was in labor and completely alone. The dispatcher calmly assured her that help was on the way. Within minutes, paramedics arrived. They gently lifted her onto a stretcher as she clutched her phone tightly, still hoping Jonathan would return her call. Every second stretched like an ache in her chest, the silence of his absence echoing louder than the siren's cry. The ambulance's sirens screamed through the night as they rushed toward the hospital. Rachel lay there, tears slipping down her cheeks. This moment was supposed to be one of joy, shared with the man she loved. Instead, she was being swept away in fear and isolation. At the hospital, doctors and nurses sprang into action. Rachel felt herself spinning, lost in a blur of pain and heartbreak. She tried to concentrate on the baby, breathing through each wave of agony as the medical team urged her forward. The clock above the bed ticked so slowly it felt like time itself had frozen. Between contractions, Rachel checked her phone over and over again. Still nothing from Jonathan. Each time she brushed her hair away from her forehead, she prayed that the next flash would be his name lighting up the screen. But the void remained. After endless hours of labor, through sobs and clenched fists, Rachel gave one final push. A sharp cry pierced the air, the unmistakable, beautiful sound of new life. Relief and joy surged through her. The tears that poured from her eyes were a mix of joy and sorrow. A nurse gently placed the baby boy in her arms. He had a delicate face, a tuft of dark hair, and tightly shut eyes that already looked curious about the world. In that brief moment, everything else, the empty phone, the cold room, faded away as only his breathing mattered. In that moment, Rachel felt a bond so strong it silenced everything else. "I'm here," she whispered to him. "I'll always be here." When she glanced at the clock again, dawn was breaking. Jonathan still hadn't come. She imagined him in some distant city, or worse, in a hotel room with Ariel. The ache in her chest nearly eclipsed the physical pain she had just endured. But she wouldn't allow that hurt to taint her baby's first moments. She named him Adam, a name Jonathan had once suggested during one of their happier nights. Despite everything, Rachel still wanted their son to feel some thread of connection to his father. The next morning, Marissa burst into the hospital room, out of breath and wide-eyed with concern. She pulled Rachel into a soft embrace and cradled baby Adam with tenderness. When she asked about Jonathan, Rachel simply shook her head. The humiliation was sharp and unforgiving. Yet in that moment, as she watched her son sleeping peacefully in Marissa's arms, she felt a fierce protectiveness bloom. No matter what, she would never let him feel abandoned. In that moment, Rachel understood something clearly. She was, for all intents and purposes, alone in this new chapter of motherhood, and something fierce began to burn inside her. If Jonathan thought he could simply vanish and leave them behind, Rachel would make sure he lived to regret it. After giving birth, Rachel remained in the hospital for several days to recover from the ordeal. She had imagined a steady stream of visitors, Jonathan's business associates, mutual friends, well-wishers. None came. Only Marissa and Rachel's parents, who had driven in from Willow Ridge the moment they heard, stayed faithfully by her side. The absence of Jonathan deepened Rachel's determination to uncover the truth. Physically, she was worn down. Her body ached, and she barely slept, afraid she might miss a call or text from him. Her mother doted on her, bringing thermoses of homemade broth and gently burping baby Adam after feedings. Her father, ever steady, reminded her that she had a home to return to in Willow Ridge if she needed it. Though they never said it aloud, Rachel could feel their quiet fury toward Jonathan simmering beneath their concern. On the morning she was discharged, Rachel felt torn, hopeful to go home, but dreading the void waiting for her there. She cradled Adam tightly to her chest as they stepped into the sharp daylight outside the hospital. Marissa had pulled the car around and offered to drive them. Inside the vehicle, Rachel sat silently, her gaze fixed on the passing city. Just a few months ago, she had joyfully designed a nursery in their estate. Soft pastels, rows of plush animals, imagining the day she and Jonathan would carry their child through the front door together. That dream now felt like a cruel joke. Returning to the estate felt hollow. The echo of her footsteps down the marble hallway only amplified the betrayal. A kind neighbor had left a small gift basket at the gate. But there was no celebration, no Jonathan, no balloons, no homecoming joy. Just Rachel and her newborn in a house that once echoed with promises. Gripped by a flood of emotion, Rachel acted. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Jonathan, clear, direct, and raw. She had delivered their child, and his absence was unforgivable. She needed answers. Her hands shook as she hit send. The message showed delivered, but never read. Hours passed, then a day, then 2, then 3. Still, nothing. Each night as Rachel rocked Adam gently to sleep, sorrow washed over her like the tide. She kissed his tiny forehead and whispered her promise to protect him, no matter what came. In the soft glow of the nursery lamp, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror. Eyes tired, but steady. A woman transformed, no longer uncertain, no longer waiting. She realized something was starting to take root inside her. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was fighting for Adam's future. This was a turning point, a shift that would lead Rachel to take the decisive steps that lay ahead. If Jonathan thought he could vanish without consequence and go on enjoying his millionaire life untouched, he was wrong. The gentle, ever-patient Rachel was starting to evolve into someone ready to confront the truth. The heartbreak had chipped away at her former self, revealing someone fierce, deliberate, and unwilling to be deceived any longer. And that meant pulling back every layer of secrecy Jonathan had so carefully hidden. Determined to uncover it all, Rachel made the decision to hire a private investigator. Marissa referred her to a man named Dominic Price, an ex-cop known for his relentless drive and refusal to back down. He arrived at the estate on a damp afternoon, dressed in a worn leather jacket and wearing a weathered expression that said he'd seen it all. After a brief exchange, Dominic pulled out a small notepad and got straight to the point. Rachel began recounting everything: the hotel receipt with the name Ariel Sutton, the sudden business trips, the whispered phone calls, and most devastating of all, Jonathan's absence during her labor. Her voice quivered at times, but each word carried a quiet fire, fueled by months of confusion and pain. Dominic listened closely, his eyes sharp and calculating. He asked for anything that might help: phone logs, credit card records, flight bookings. Rachel gave him whatever she could find. The more they dug, the more obvious the inconsistencies became. With a firm voice, Dominic promised to begin the investigation right away. "I've seen men like this before," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "They think they're untouchable. Don't worry, I'll get to the truth." His certainty gave Rachel a lifeline in a sea of doubt. When he left, Rachel felt a mix of relief and dread. What if the truth was even worse than she feared? Her thoughts churned endlessly. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, bracing herself for the storm that might come with every new fact. Less than a week later, Dominic called with an early update. He had tracked Jonathan to multiple upscale hotels across the state, all under various aliases. Sometimes he registered as C. Dalton, other times as J. Davis. The pattern that emerged didn't suggest just one affair, but a series of covert liaisons, or perhaps suspicious business dealings cloaked as personal visits. The evidence didn't stop there. Dominic had also uncovered several offshore bank accounts with large deposits and withdrawals made at erratic intervals, enough to raise suspicions of potential money laundering or other financial crimes. But the most jarring discovery came during a deeper background check. Rachel had always known Jonathan used to be Jonathan Delaney, and she had assumed he changed his surname for personal or branding reasons. But Dominic's research revealed something darker. Jonathan had a sealed legal history, including allegations of fraud and embezzlement linked to a failed tech startup he had launched fresh out of college. The charges had never gone to court due to insufficient evidence, but the implications were clear. Jonathan wasn't the man he claimed to be. Each new revelation struck Rachel like a blow. Her chest tightened as the truth peeled away the last pieces of the illusion she had married. Each revelation slammed into Rachel's heart, threatening to shatter it. The innocent trust she once clung to was gone. Now she saw things clearly. She had fallen for a man who might be entangled in a world of deceit, criminal schemes, and secret affairs. As she held baby Adam close, a storm of questions swirled in her mind. How could she shield him from the consequences of a father who might have built an empire on lies? If Jonathan was involved in illegal dealings, this was no longer just about betrayal. It could spiral into public disgrace, financial collapse, or even danger for their child. But Rachel refused to be paralyzed by fear. She steadied herself. Her first priority had to be protecting Adam's future. If Jonathan had been funneling funds into offshore accounts, she needed to make sure she and Adam would not be left vulnerable. She reached out to a family law attorney named Patricia Yates, a woman known for her fierce advocacy and sharp mind. After hearing Rachel's story, Patricia moved quickly, gathering records, drafting paperwork, and preparing for what could become a very public divorce and custody battle. The course was set. Rachel's heartbreak was giving way to resolve. She would no longer sit in silence while Jonathan endangered or disrespected them. If he wouldn't return willingly to take responsibility, she would drag him into the daylight, even if it meant standing before a judge to do it. With legal proceedings beginning and Dominic's investigation expanding, Rachel took one more chance to contact Jonathan directly. She sent him a short but clear email outlining everything she had learned: the suspicious hotel stays, the offshore accounts, the sealed legal history. She demanded that he return home to face his responsibilities. She warned that if he didn't respond, she would have no choice but to proceed with legal action. Then she waited. Her heart raced each time she refreshed her inbox. But days went by. Nothing. No reply. No acknowledgement. Strangely, even Jonathan's normally quiet social media presence had gone dark. His profile showed no recent activity, no public statements, no baby announcements, nothing. Even his company's official website featured only glowing press releases praising his visionary leadership and tech innovations. There were no signs of disruption, no mention of his personal life, his wife, or his newborn son. It was as if he had vanished. Then, late one night, as Rachel rocked Adam gently in the dim nursery light, her phone buzzed. It was Dominic. He sounded urgent. Jonathan had been seen at an exclusive private club downtown. He hadn't been alone. The woman he was with matched the description of Ariel Sutton. Dominic hadn't been able to snap a photo in time, but he was confident it was them. Rachel's heart pounded, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was fury. A mother's fury. How dare Jonathan strut around town with another woman while abandoning his own son? Fueled by fury and heartbreak, Rachel coordinated a plan with Dominic and Marissa to confront him. Rumors had it that Jonathan regularly attended high-profile business gatherings at a penthouse downtown. If he was bold enough to make public appearances, Rachel would ensure he faced her directly. The plan was simple. Marissa would gain access to the event as a +1 of a well-known investor, then text Dominic and Rachel once Jonathan was spotted. The goal was to catch him by surprise, before he could make another slick escape. 2 nights later, Rachel sat in a parked car a block away from the shimmering skyscraper where the function was being held. Her heart pounded as she watched luxury sedans line up, dropping off guests in designer evening wear. A message from Marissa popped up. Jonathan was inside, dressed in a navy suit, accompanied by a striking woman with jet black hair. Dominic, positioned nearby, looked toward Rachel and gave her a quick nod. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice edged with concern. Rachel clenched her fists, the memory of giving birth alone still raw. The sleepless nights with Adam and the stinging betrayal of Jonathan's lies still fresh in her bones. The image of Adam's tiny fingers wrapped around hers flashed in her mind, reigniting her purpose. "I have to," she whispered. With that, she stepped out of the car, her legs shaky with adrenaline and emotion. The elevator ride to the penthouse was quiet, tense. The mirrored walls showed her a reflection she barely recognized, a woman shaped by pain but hardened by resolve. She straightened her posture, inhaled deeply, and whispered to herself, "For Adam." When the doors opened, she stepped into a lavish scene filled with soft jazz, clinking glasses, and whispered conversations among the elite. Spotting Marissa near the rear of the room, Rachel pushed her way through the crowd, eyes darting across the sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns, and there he was. Jonathan stood by a marble fireplace, leaning in close to a glamorous woman in a shimmering dress. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Her steps quickened. As she approached, heads turned. The crowd quieted. Jonathan looked up, his expression frozen in disbelief. "Rachel," his voice barely made it past his lips. She didn't pause. "How dare you vanish when your son was born?" she said, her voice low but vibrating with rage. "How dare you ignore every call, every message?" Their eyes locked. Rachel didn't flinch. The weight of every sleepless night, every unanswered question hung between them like a storm about to break. The woman beside him, undoubtedly Ariel Sutton, gave Rachel a pointed glare before stepping aside with an annoyed huff. Jonathan looked momentarily stunned, his mouth opening but no words coming. Around them, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some sympathetic, others intrigued. Finally, Jonathan spoke. "Not here," he muttered, lowering his voice as he reached out to guide Rachel away from the crowd. But she pulled her arm back sharply. "You don't get to hush me away," she snapped. "I've spent months in silence," Rachel snapped. "We talk now, in front of everyone." A collective gasp swept through the crowd, and a heavy silence blanketed the room. Rachel's voice, sharp and steady, sliced through the air like a blade, cracking the polished veneer of luxury and control. She felt the power shift tangibly, as if years of suppression were shedding off her shoulders in an instant. This was the moment everything began to unravel for Jonathan. His face flushed a deep red, a mixture of rage and panic flaring in his eyes. It was clear he was caught, torn between brushing her off in public and recognizing the danger she posed. Rachel knew too much. Too much that could destroy everything he had built, if it ever came to light. He inhaled deeply, trying to save face, and led her into a shadowy alcove off to the side of the suite. Dominic and Marissa stayed within view, prepared to step in if Jonathan made any attempt to flee. In the dimly lit corner, Rachel faced him, her heart pounding, her voice full of the pain she had carried for weeks. Every fiber of her being screamed for justice, for closure. Not just for herself, but for Adam. "How could you leave me to give birth alone?" she demanded. "Do you have any idea what that was like?" She raised her phone, showing him the screen filled with desperate texts and missed calls. Jonathan raked a hand through his hair, his voice unsteady. "Rachel, you don't understand the pressure I've been under." Her eyes narrowed. "Pressure? That doesn't justify walking out on your wife and your child." She stepped in closer, her voice low but charged. "I know about Ariel. I know about the offshore accounts. And I know about your sealed legal record. Whatever game you're playing, it ends now." Her words landed with the force of a gavel, and for once, Jonathan didn't have a ready comeback. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He exhaled, as if trying to compose himself. "There were deals I couldn't close with you constantly questioning me," he said, his tone cold. "That's why I had to manage things on my own." His eyes darted toward Dominic and Marissa, clearly calculating the risk. "If those investments go public, it'll ruin me." Rachel shook her head, appalled. "Your reputation? That's all you care about? You have a son, Jonathan, a child who hasn't even seen his father's face." For a split second, guilt flickered across Jonathan's expression, but it was quickly buried under the same arrogance she had grown to dread. "I never asked for this to happen now," he muttered. "I had business plans. Things got complicated." Rachel's fury surged. It swelled from every memory of solitude, every night spent in silence, every lie he'd fed her with a smile. She wanted to scream. She wanted to see regret in his face, some sign of remorse. But all she saw was a man obsessed with control and self-preservation. "You're unbelievable," she said, her voice trembling. "You're about to lose everything you claim to care about, starting with your family." At that moment, Marissa stepped forward. "I think it's time for you to leave, Jonathan," Rachel said quietly, but her voice carried a sharp edge that made it impossible to ignore. Jonathan hesitated. He glanced toward the door leading back to the crowd, clearly debating whether to spin some narrative for the audience watching from a distance. But in the end, he said nothing. He cast one last venomous look in Rachel's direction and turned on his heel, vanishing into the party. Rachel's eyes blurred with tears. Her knees nearly buckled, but Marissa stepped in, wrapping a steady arm around her shoulders. The warmth of that touch grounded her, reminding her she wasn't alone in this fight. Dominic gave her a quiet, affirming nod, as if to say, "That man just proved everything we suspected." The confrontation had been loud, messy, and public, but it brought a strange clarity. Rachel no longer clung to any illusions about the man she had married. The veil had lifted, and all that remained was a painful, sobering truth. That same night, Rachel called her attorney, Patricia Yates, and recounted everything that had happened. Patricia, calm and calculating, assured her that Jonathan's display of indifference could be valuable evidence in court, proof of emotional neglect, especially in a custody dispute. Rachel felt drained, yet driven. Her heart still ached, but her resolve was unshakable. She would protect her son from the chaos Jonathan brought into their lives. The mother in her was awakening fully now. Fierce, vigilant, and unwilling to let lies dictate their future. In the following weeks, Rachel took swift, purposeful action toward reclaiming control of her life. She worked closely with Patricia, laying the legal groundwork to ensure stability for her and Adam. Patricia officially filed for divorce on Rachel's behalf, citing irreconcilable differences, financial deception, and emotional abandonment. Rachel felt a sharp pang as she signed the papers. Not the life she had imagined, but the only path left that felt right. She didn't mourn the marriage anymore. She mourned the woman who had once believed it would last. Meanwhile, Dominic pressed deeper into Jonathan's affairs. He uncovered even more disturbing details. Evidence of funds being moved between offshore accounts and shell companies, all under aliases. The money trail pointed to investor funds being redirected for personal use. Jonathan had been living lavishly, while secretly associating with figures rumored to have links to organized financial crimes. If the evidence ever came to light, Jonathan's entire empire could collapse. But Rachel's focus remained firmly on Adam. She poured her love and attention into motherhood, waking early for feedings, cuddling him close, marveling at his every little smile. She took him for walks around the estate's manicured gardens, trying to create a peaceful, nurturing space amid the storm. In every coo and sleepy blink, she found pieces of herself returning. In those quiet hours, she realized that Adam was her anchor, her reason, her fight. And through him, she rediscovered the strength she never knew she had. Everything she did now was to ensure that his life would remain untouched by the shadows of Jonathan's past. One of the first major changes Rachel made was hiring her own financial advisor. A gentle yet sharp-minded woman named Gabriella Tan entered Rachel's life at just the right time. Gabriella, a trusted financial advisor, helped Rachel open separate bank accounts and taught her how to protect her assets. She also suggested transferring partial ownership of the estate into Rachel's name, if permitted by their state's marital laws. While the legal process could get messy, taking those steps would at least grant Rachel some control over the home she currently lived in. Every conversation with Gabriella felt like a breath of clarity, a small but powerful step toward autonomy. Rachel soaked in the knowledge, realizing how much of her life had been financially tethered to Jonathan's whims. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of power return to her hands. At the same time, Rachel was caught in a whirlwind of emotion. She couldn't shake the guilt, as though she had failed in her vows. But deep down, she knew the truth. It was Jonathan who had dismantled their marriage. Still, the grief lingered. She sometimes found herself missing the man she thought he was. The man who smiled warmly, who spoke tenderly of building a family together. She would hold Adam and recall the nights Jonathan had whispered about the joys of fatherhood. Those memories haunted her. They would surface in quiet moments, like ghosts of a life that never truly existed. Each recollection stung, but also hardened her resolve to protect Adam from illusions. But those memories now felt like relics of a different man. Maybe they always had been. Support began to pour in from unexpected places. Her parents, though heartbroken by what was happening, reminded her that real love shows up when you need it most. Friends from college reached out when word of Jonathan Reed's scandal started circulating. Some offered temporary places to stay, while others sent encouraging messages. Through it all, Marissa stayed by her side, helping with Adam, offering company, making sure Rachel had time to meet with Patricia and Dominic. That steady stream of support became a lifeline. Rachel realized that while Jonathan had abandoned her, the people who truly cared never had. And in their kindness, she found strength. Bit by bit, Rachel felt her emotional wounds begin to scab. She wasn't healed, not even close, but she was gaining strength. The heartbreak no longer consumed her. It was now tempered by something far stronger: purpose. Jonathan might have money and influence, but Rachel had truth. If he thought he could outrun responsibility, he had deeply misjudged her. Amid the legal motions and Dominic's expanding investigation, Rachel was caught off guard when a pristine white envelope arrived at the front gate. It bore Jonathan's personal seal. Inside was a neatly typed letter, brief and calculated. "Rachel, I know our last meeting was chaotic. There are forces involved that you don't fully understand. I did what I had to do, for our family, even if it doesn't look that way. Let's meet privately. No lawyers, no investigators. I want to make things right. Jonathan." The letter ended with a phone number and a suggested meeting place: a luxury restaurant in the heart of downtown. Rachel's hands trembled as she finished reading. A surge of disbelief followed by a wave of anger gripped her. After all this time, after the silence and betrayal, this was how he reached out? A storm of emotion battered her. Was this a trap? Another manipulation to get her to drop the case? Or was there something real in those words? A tiny ember of hope flickered in her heart, but she forced herself not to fall into old patterns. That evening, after tucking Adam into bed, Rachel called Patricia to ask for advice. Patricia's response was firm: "Bring Dominic or Marissa with you, just in case. If you choose to meet him, you need witnesses in case things go sideways," Patricia warned firmly. Dominic agreed, offering to sit discreetly at a nearby table during the meeting. Rachel weighed her options. The thought of facing Jonathan again made her stomach churn. But if there was even a sliver of hope for a peaceful resolution, for Adam's sake, she had to try. On a chilly, overcast afternoon, Rachel arrived at the upscale restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back tightly. At a corner table, Jonathan sat waiting, dressed immaculately in a tailored suit. He still wore that polished, magnetic look that had once captivated her completely. When their eyes met, a surge of emotions overwhelmed her: loss, longing, and righteous anger. He stood and leaned in as if to kiss her cheek, but Rachel took a deliberate step back. She sat down, arms folded, steadying herself. "You have 10 minutes," she said flatly. For a brief moment, Jonathan looked hurt, almost surprised by her cold demeanor. But then he dove into his explanation. He spoke of business deals that had turned volatile, shady partners who made threats against his company, and offshore transfers that he claimed were necessary to keep everything afloat. He admitted that Ariel was part of these deals, but insisted it was only for appearances, to lure a high-stakes investor. When Rachel brought up the intimate moment she had witnessed at the penthouse, Jonathan brushed it off as part of the act, a performance to earn trust. It sounded far-fetched, but he delivered the story with practiced ease. Then, leaning in closer, he lowered his voice and glanced around the room. "Rachel, there are people out there who want to take me down. If this goes public, they won't just come after me. They'll tear you and Adam apart too. I'm trying to protect you both." Rachel's eyes narrowed as she studied him. "You call abandoning me while I was giving birth protection?" Her voice wavered but stayed firm. "You call humiliating me in front of the entire city protecting your family?" Jonathan winced. "I was under immense pressure. That deal, it had to close that night. Everything was riding on it. I couldn't afford any distractions. I tried calling." "Don't lie to me," she cut in sharply. "I checked the phone logs. You never called." She took a deep breath, grounding herself. "Maybe you think this is your twisted version of protecting us, but from where I'm sitting, it feels like betrayal." A tense silence fell between them. Finally, Jonathan exhaled, slow and heavy. "I know you don't believe me right now, but give me time. I can prove everything I'm telling you is true." He leaned forward, lowering his voice again. "Withdraw the divorce petition, just for now." "Let me fix this, for Adam's sake," Jonathan pleaded. Rachel stood, her decision already made. "You've had more than enough time," she said firmly. "I won't let you twist this into another story." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "If you truly want to make things right, then show up to mediation. Bring facts. Bring a real willingness to do what's best for your son. Otherwise, don't bother." Her voice didn't tremble. She didn't flinch under his gaze. This time, she wasn't pleading, she was setting boundaries. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Outside, Dominic emerged from his position near the bar, offering her a subtle nod. Rachel felt a wave of relief. She had done the right thing. Jonathan's plea only reinforced how deeply caught he was in his own mess. If redemption was what he wanted, he'd have to earn it through proper channels, not secret meetings and half-truths. In the days leading up to the court-mandated mediation, Patricia worked meticulously. She assembled a comprehensive case, backed by evidence of Jonathan's evasiveness and questionable financial activity. Dominic provided a full dossier: suspicious wire transfers, shell company ties, aliases, and contacts with individuals rumored to be involved in laundering schemes. Every page of the report was a nail in the coffin of the illusion Rachel once believed in. Her stomach twisted as she read through bank statements showing money moved in the dead of night, as if trying to erase a trail. She felt betrayed, not just as a wife, but as a woman who once trusted blindly. Rachel's heart pounded each time she reviewed the files. It was a sobering reminder of how far their once idyllic marriage had fallen. On the morning of mediation, Rachel dressed in a modest navy suit. She wanted to appear calm, serious, composed. Marissa stayed behind with Adam, reassuring Rachel that she had everything under control. Outside the courthouse, gray clouds hung heavy, mirroring the atmosphere inside. The mediation took place in a sterile, windowless conference room. Rachel sat beside Patricia, across the table from Jonathan, who was flanked by a stern-looking attorney with square glasses and a tightly drawn expression. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Years of history lay between them, now reduced to documents and accusations. The court-appointed mediator, a middle-aged woman with a firm but gentle demeanor, opened the session by outlining the dispute. Rachel was seeking full custody and financial support for Adam. Jonathan had yet to formally respond, but claimed to possess evidence that would excuse or lessen his misconduct. When it was his turn, Jonathan repeated much of what he had said at the restaurant. Business deals, pressure, compromised partners. He insisted that Ariel was merely a business associate and that the financial transfers were strategic. His lawyer argued that Jonathan's assets were currently locked in delicate negotiations, and that awarding Rachel a large settlement could destabilize the company, potentially harming the family's long-term security. Rachel sat in stunned silence as she listened, not to the words, but to the cowardice laced beneath them. Her hands clenched under the table, every instinct telling her that Jonathan's version of protection was just another form of evasion. Rachel's frustration simmered beneath the surface. Even now, he was placing profits over parenthood. Patricia countered decisively. She laid out the records Dominic had uncovered: bank transactions, forged aliases, unexplained hotel expenses. Every document was time-stamped and supported by financial trails. One by one, she presented them, leaving little room for ambiguity. Jonathan's attorney tried to deflect, but it was clear the extent of Patricia's preparation had caught them off guard. The mediator's expression grew noticeably more serious. She turned to Jonathan. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice neutral but firm. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Reed. Are you prepared to address them?" The mediator asked, her tone firm. Sweat glistened on Jonathan's forehead. He glanced at his attorney, who leaned in and whispered something Rachel couldn't hear. After a pause, Jonathan spoke, his voice barely above a murmur. "I can't comment on every detail because of non-disclosure agreements and ongoing business negotiations. But I assure you, nothing I've done is illegal. Everything was done to protect our investments." Rachel's hands curled into fists on the table, her nails biting into her palms. The audacity of his words, spoken as if profits outweighed people, hit her like a slap. Rachel let out a sharp breath, her jaw tight. "I gave birth alone. I haven't seen a single dollar for our son's care. How is that protecting our investments?" She leaned forward. "Adam is not an investment. He's our son." Jonathan's tone hardened. "Don't make me the villain. You knew my business was high stakes. You knew it would require sacrifices." Her heart pounded in her chest, fury surging like wildfire. Patricia's voice cut through the room. "Leaving your wife alone in the hospital is not a business sacrifice. It's neglect." The mediator quickly raised her hand. "Let's bring this back to a productive discussion," she said, sensing the session unraveling. She proposed a temporary arrangement. Jonathan would provide a fixed amount of child support while the financial disclosures were sorted out. In exchange, Rachel would allow him supervised visitation with Adam. A future court date would determine permanent custody and asset division. Neither side was satisfied, but both agreed. It was a fragile truce. Rachel left the courthouse feeling a mix of emotions: relief that there was now a legal framework in place for Adam's care, and dread that this was only the beginning. As she walked out, she felt Jonathan's eyes on her, his stare heavy with unspoken intent. She could feel the chill of his gaze, not remorseful, but calculating, as if he were already plotting his next move. He wasn't done, and neither was the storm. In the following weeks, Jonathan made a few half-hearted efforts to see Adam under the court's supervision. The visits were held in a neutral setting, a child-friendly space at a local community center. Rachel watched from behind a glass panel, her emotions twisted into knots. Jonathan held Adam awkwardly, like a fragile piece of glass. Sometimes, he seemed touched by the baby's giggles or curious stares. Other times, his eyes wandered and his mind seemed elsewhere. Rachel couldn't tell if he was grappling with guilt or merely playing the part for legal appearances. Meanwhile, Dominic's investigation reached its breaking point. He uncovered damning emails, evidence that Jonathan had funneled investor money into extravagant purchases, including high-end gifts for Ariel Sutton. Even more troubling, the correspondence hinted at links to shady financiers already on law enforcement's radar for laundering money. Dominic urged Rachel to be extremely cautious. If federal investigators began digging into Jonathan's affairs, even the mansion could become subject to asset seizure. Sure enough, Jonathan's true colors resurfaced. One afternoon, as Rachel returned home from a supervised visit with Adam, she found a letter taped to the front gate. It was from Jonathan's attorney. The document demanded that she vacate the estate within 30 days. According to the letter, the mansion had been purchased before the marriage. Rachel had no legal claim to it. She was furious. Rachel immediately called Patricia, who calmly reassured her that Jonathan had no legal authority to evict her without a formal court order, especially not with a minor child involved. Still, her hands shook as she hung up the phone, the sheer cruelty of the letter echoing in her mind like a thunderclap. The home where she'd nursed Adam, where she'd cried herself to sleep, was now another weapon in Jonathan's arsenal. Still, the audacity of the maneuver rattled Rachel to her core. The next day, Marissa spotted Jonathan driving past the estate, Ariel Sutton seated beside him. As they slowed in front of the gate, Ariel smirked in Rachel's direction. It was the final straw. That night, Rachel sat beside Adam's crib, tears sliding down her cheeks. Fury and helplessness churned inside her. Jonathan was escalating the intimidation, trying to wear her down, to frighten her into submission. The soft hum of Adam's breath was the only thing anchoring her. She placed a hand on her chest, trying to calm her spiraling thoughts, but all she could feel was fire. But he had picked the wrong woman. Rachel made a quiet, fierce vow to herself. He would not win. She would see this through, no matter how long it took. She would expose every lie, every hidden crime. Then, just as she feared she was at her breaking point, fate shifted. Dominic sent a text, "Need to meet. Big news." They met at a small, tucked-away cafe later that afternoon. Over tea, Dominic slid a thick folder across the table. Rachel opened it slowly and stared in disbelief. Inside were comprehensive records of Jonathan's illicit activities, forged contracts, layers of shell companies, and email exchanges clearly indicating money laundering schemes. Dominic had even managed to retrieve a private message where Jonathan openly boasted about outsmarting investigators and shielding his assets from seizure. Each line of text felt like a knife, carving away the last remnants of the man she thought she knew. Rachel's hands trembled as she turned page after damning page. It was worse than she had imagined. Jonathan's empire wasn't just flawed, it was criminal. She felt a wave of nausea thinking about the investors who had likely been duped, the trust he had shattered, the laws he had trampled. How many lives had he damaged in pursuit of his empire? How many others had he manipulated as effortlessly as he had her? No wonder he had been so desperate to keep her quiet. With Dominic's evidence in hand, Rachel met with Patricia. Together, they compiled a full report for the court. While Rachel knew it wasn't her job to pursue criminal charges, she understood that once these documents were submitted in the custody hearing, law enforcement wouldn't be far behind. And indeed, the shift came quickly. Within days, whispers that had long haunted Jonathan Reed's business reputation exploded into national headlines. Major news outlets ran exposés, tracing secretive money trails and interviewing whistleblowers, former employees who described how Jonathan had manipulated records and hidden transactions. The fall was swift and brutal. What had once seemed unshakable, his wealth, his image, his charm, was disintegrating before the world's eyes. The same public that once praised Jonathan as a brilliant tech innovator and generous donor now saw him as a fraud. In the chaos, Jonathan turned to the one person he had pushed away, Rachel. He flooded her voicemail with panicked messages. Rambling texts pleaded for her to help clear his name, to explain things to the press. He said he was misunderstood, that everything he did was for their future. But Rachel heard the truth in his timing. Jonathan only came crawling back once his empire began to crumble. He hadn't called from the hospital. He hadn't been there for Adam's birth. He only cared now that he had something to lose. Her heart didn't ache anymore. It burned with clarity. This wasn't about redemption. It was desperation. The final custody and financial hearing arrived on a crisp morning, with news vans and cameras clustered outside the courthouse, eager to catch a glimpse of the scandal-ridden entrepreneur and his estranged wife. Rachel stepped out of the car, dressed in a simple but elegant gray suit. Patricia walked beside her, clutching a folder that held the truth, neatly organized, impossible to ignore. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. Jonathan appeared disheveled, his eyes shadowed by deep circles. The once confident image he maintained had crumbled. His attorney looked equally drained, papers askew and confidence waning. The judge presiding over the hearing reviewed the substantial evidence submitted by Patricia and Dominic. Rachel sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the bench as the judge delivered a stern reprimand. "Mr. Reed," the judge began, "your financial recklessness, paired with mounting evidence of possible criminal activity, presents a danger to the stability of your family. Ongoing investigations confirm the seriousness of these accusations." Then came the moment that made Rachel's breath hitch. "In light of your demonstrated pattern of deceit and emotional neglect," the judge continued, "this court awards full legal and physical custody of Adam Reed to Ms. Rachel Reed. Supervised visitation rights will be allowed under court-appointed oversight, pending further review." Rachel blinked rapidly as the magnitude of the ruling settled in. She had done it. Adam was safe. He was hers to protect, legally, wholly, and without question. The judge also ordered Jonathan to continue child support payments, with adjustments to be determined once his financial and legal circumstances were clarified by state investigators. The gavel struck with finality, echoing through the courtroom. It was over. Outside, the courthouse steps buzzed with media chaos. Reporters pushed microphones forward, shouting questions. Patricia stepped in, shielding Rachel from the crush. "No comment," she said firmly. "Please respect the privacy of the child." In the crowd, Rachel caught sight of Jonathan. He was flanked by his lawyer, trying to push past the flashing cameras. For a brief second, their eyes locked. In that glance, Rachel saw something in Jonathan's expression, a flicker of regret. Whether it was for losing his son, his wealth, or the image he had so carefully curated, Rachel couldn't say, and she didn't care to. What mattered now was the future. Rachel returned home and began rebuilding. She took on a remote position as a marketing consultant, working part-time to stay close to Adam. Marissa and her parents provided steady love and help, filling their home with warmth. Though the mansion was still technically under legal review and partially frozen due to Jonathan's financial probe, Rachel remained there for now. But the walls meant little to her. The real victory was peace. She had survived betrayal, isolation, and legal warfare. And in doing so, she had found something stronger than comfort: clarity. Each night, when she rocked Adam to sleep, there was no more trembling, no more dread. Just hope, just calm, and a mother who would never again be left in the dark. Jonathan would now have to face the consequences of his own actions. If he ever hoped to redeem himself, it would have to be from the ground up, stripped of illusions and far from the empire he once built on secrecy and ambition. He would no longer hide behind boardrooms and facades, no longer manipulate narratives to suit his desires. The silence left in the wake of his collapse was deafening and deserved. And so, the woman who had once been naive enough to believe in a fairy tale marriage found herself forging a new path. One shaped by the fires of betrayal and heartbreak, but also hardened by resilience and unconditional love. Each step she took now was deliberate, measured, not just in survival, but in healing. The strength she once doubted in herself had become the cornerstone of the life she was building. In the end, Jonathan Reed's downfall began the moment he abandoned his pregnant wife. And Rachel Reed's victory was sealed the moment she vowed never again to be powerless. Rachel's story is a reminder that real strength often emerges when life delivers its cruelest blows. From the despair of being left alone in her most vulnerable moment, through courtroom battles and revelations of deception, she never wavered. She stood firm to protect what mattered most: her child and her self-worth. She didn't just endure, she grew. She didn't just survive, she transformed. While Jonathan was consumed by greed and blinded by lies, Rachel carved a life of truth and independence, one that proved wealth could never replace loyalty, nor power substitute love. Today, her world may not be the perfect dream she once imagined, but it is real. And it is hers. A life full of hope, grounded in love, and built for a better future for her son, Adam. Let Rachel's journey inspire anyone navigating heartbreak or betrayal. You can rise, you can reclaim your power, and you can build a brighter tomorrow. If this powerful story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring these narratives to more people who might find strength and hope in them. Join our community for more compelling dramas, and together, let's celebrate the stories that connect and uplift us all.